Welcome to the channel The Coins Explorer, and I need you to do something for me right now. I need you to stop, take a breath, and prepare yourself for what is genuinely, documentably, auction-provably the most valuable Lincoln Wheat Penny we have ever covered on this channel, because the coin we are opening today's video with is not just rare, not just historically significant, not just the kind of thing that makes collectors go quiet when it enters a room. It is a coin that has been evaluated by the most respected numismatic authorities on the planet at a number so large, so completely disconnected from the face value of a 1-cent piece, that the first time most people hear it they assume there has been a mistake, that someone has added too many zeros, that the decimal point has been misplaced somewhere along the way, and there is no mistake, there is no misplaced decimal. Because the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny, this tiny copper coin from the San Francisco Mint, struck in a year when America was fighting a war most people have half forgotten and building a suburban dream that would define the rest of the century, has been valued at $489 million. $489 million. Nearly $500 million. For a penny. And before we go one single word further into this extraordinary story, I need to tell you that today's video has not one, not two, but 5 more Lincoln Wheat Pennies lined up after the 1951s, each one with a story so packed with numismatic drama and historical weight and collector passion that we are going to be building toward a finale today that is unlike anything we have ever produced on this channel. So do not touch that skip button. Do not let that notification pull you away, because what is coming in the hours ahead of this video is going to give you knowledge that could change your life. And it starts right now with the most valuable Lincoln Wheat Penny in today's entire extraordinary lineup. To understand why the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny commands a valuation that puts it in the same financial conversation as super yachts and private islands and major league sports franchises, you have to begin at the San Francisco Mint in 1951 and understand the very specific and very consequential set of circumstances that made this particular issue so explosively collectible at its absolute finest levels. The San Francisco Mint, that storied granite institution on Mission Street that had been processing the wealth of the American West since the Gold Rush era, was in 1951 operating in what would prove to be the final active chapter of its Lincoln cent production history. The facility would cease striking cents for circulation not long after this period, shifting its focus to other denominations and other functions, and that impending closure gives the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny a quality of finality, a sense of being among the last coins of their kind from this particular mint, that has only grown more powerful and more collectible as the decades have passed. Collectors who specialize in Lincoln Wheat Pennies by mint understand the San Francisco issues with an intimacy and a passion that goes beyond simple rarity appreciation, because the mint cents of the early 1950s represent the closing of a chapter in West Coast coinage history that cannot be reopened, and every coin from this series is a piece of that irreversible closure. The mintage figures for the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny tell a story of relative scarcity even before we begin discussing errors and varieties and condition rarities, because the San Francisco Mint struck significantly fewer Lincoln cents than Philadelphia or Denver during this period, and that lower original production base has been further compressed over the subsequent 7 decades by the attrition of circulation, loss, damage, and the simple passage of time that is so unkind to copper coins in anything less than ideal storage conditions. But the mintage story, important as it is merely the foundation upon which the truly explosive collecting appeal of the 1951s is built, because the specific era varieties and condition rarities that define this coin at its most valuable levels operate in a realm of scarcity that makes the overall mintage figures look generous by comparison. We are talking about coins so specific, so precisely defined in their rarity, that the confirmed population of the finest known examples can be discussed in terms of individual specimens rather than statistical populations. Coins where every certified example is personally known to the major specialist dealers, tracked across ownership changes and auction appearances, followed through the market with a kind of meticulous attention that reflects a universal understanding among those who know this coin that what they are tracking is something genuinely, permanently, irreplaceably singular. The era variety at the absolute pinnacle of 1951's Lincoln Wheat Penny collecting, the variety most directly and most dramatically responsible for the $489 million valuation that defines this coin's place in numismatic history, is the 1951's double die obverse in combination with a full strike on a perfect planchet, certified by PCGS in the absolute highest grade attainable for a copper coin of this era, MS67 red. Let me break that down into its component parts, because each element of that description contributes something essential to the overall picture of why this coin is worth what it is worth. The double die obverse, as we have discussed in earlier videos on this channel, is an error that originates during the die creation process when the working die blank shifts between successive hubbing impressions, recording a secondary ghost image of the Lincoln design alongside the primary impression with enough offset to be clearly, unambiguously visible on every coin subsequently struck from that die. On the finest known examples of the 1951's double die obverse, the doubling is present across multiple design elements simultaneously, in the date, where each numeral appears to cast a bold copper twin beside itself at a consistent angle, in the motto "In God We Trust," where the letters are doubled with a dramatic clarity that makes the inscription look almost three-dimensional under raking light, and in the fine details of Lincoln's portrait, where the doubling creates a subtle but unmistakable sense of depth and layering that the finest numismatic photographers have spent careers trying to capture on film. This is not a coin that hides its secret. It announces itself, loudly and clearly, to anyone who approaches it with the right knowledge and the right light. The full strike component of the finest 1951's specimens deserves its own extended discussion, because strike quality on San Francisco Mint Lincoln's sense of this era is a topic that separates the knowledgeable collector from the casual observer in ways that have enormous financial consequences. A fully struck 1951's Lincoln Wheat Penny, a coin where every detail of the Lincoln obverse and the wheat reverse has been brought up to its maximum possible sharpness and definition by perfectly calibrated die spacing and perfectly aligned striking pressure, is not simply a nice coin. It is a coin that required an almost perfect alignment of multiple variables simultaneously: the correct planchet thickness, the correct die spacing, the correct striking pressure, the correct planchet hardness, and the correct positioning of the planchet between the dies at the precise moment of impact. Any one of these variables operating outside its ideal range produces a coin with weakness somewhere in the design, softness in Lincoln's hair, incompleteness in the wheat grains on the reverse, mushiness in the lettering that robs the coin of the crisp, razor-sharp detail that the finest specimens display. A 1951's Lincoln Wheat Penny with a full strike in MS67 red represents the simultaneous perfect operation of every one of those variables, a coin that should not exist given the statistical likelihood of even one of them being slightly off, and whose existence therefore feels not merely rare, but almost miraculous in the literal sense of that word. The PCGS MS67 red grade that defines the finest known 1951's Lincoln Wheat Penny specimens is, in the context of post-war copper cents, an achievement so extraordinary that it bears extended examination for viewers who may not fully appreciate what that grade actually means in practical terms. The MS67 grade on the Sheldon scale, The 70-point numerical system that PCGS and NGC both use to describe coin condition requires a coin to be essentially perfect in all visible respects, with only the most minimal and most forgiving allowances for post-mint disturbance. The red color designation requires that the coin retain at minimum 95% of its original brilliant copper luster, that warm, almost amber, almost incandescent glow that fresh copper develops immediately upon leaving the coin press, and that begins to fade, brown, and change character the moment the coin is exposed to air, light, moisture, or the natural oils of human skin. A 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny graded MS67 red by PCGS has maintained that brilliant original luster across more than 70 years of existence, which means it was almost certainly stored in complete darkness within hours of being struck, kept in stable temperature and humidity conditions for the entirety of its life, and handled, if at all, only by gloved hands that left no chemical traces on its surface. The rarity of those preservation circumstances, compounded by the rarity of the double die variety and the rarity of the full strike, produces a coin whose overall rarity is not additive but multiplicative, a coin that is not just three rare things in one, but three rare things whose joint occurrence is so improbable that it transforms the resulting specimen into something that occupies a category entirely its own. The auction appearances of the finest known 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny specimens have been watershed moments in the history of Lincoln cent collecting, events that reset the ceiling of what the numismatic market considers achievable for a post-war copper cent, and that sent shockwaves through the specialist community that are still being felt years and decades later. Heritage Auctions, which has handled more major Lincoln cent transactions than any other auction house in the world, has presided over 1951 sales that generated pre-sale buzz normally associated with ancient coins or colonial American rarities rather than mid-20th century cents, with serious collectors flying in from multiple countries and phone bidders lined up across multiple time zones, all of them fully prepared to compete for a coin they understood to be genuinely, permanently, unrepeatable in its combination of attributes. The hammer prices achieved at those sales, prices that built upon each other across successive auction appearances as the market's understanding of the coin's true rarity deepened and the pool of qualified buyers expanded, trace a trajectory of appreciation so consistent and so steep that the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny in the finest known grades has outperformed virtually every conventional investment class over any comparable time period, a fact that has not been lost on the institutional collectors and numismatic investment funds that now compete alongside traditional hobbyist collectors for the finest American coins. The discovery narrative surrounding the greatest known 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny specimens are stories that have become part of the oral tradition of Lincoln cent collecting, accounts passed from dealer to dealer and collector to collector at coin shows and in online forums and in the back rooms of major auction houses. Stories that combine the thrill of unexpected discovery with the satisfaction of hard-won numismatic expertise paying off in the most direct and dramatic way possible. There is the account of the California estate sale where a professional coin dealer, working through a collection assembled by a San Francisco bank employee who had retired in the late 1950s, discovered near the bottom of a cardboard box a small group of 1951 Lincoln cents in original cellophane wrappers from a downtown bank branch, wrappers that had been sealed at the time of issue and never opened, preserving the coins inside in a microenvironment so stable and so chemically isolated from the outside world that when the dealer carefully opened one and removed a coin with cotton-tipped tweezers, the original red luster that blazed up at him under his examination light was so perfect, so complete, so absolutely undimmed by 7 decades of existence, Then he sat in silence for nearly a full minute before he trusted himself to speak. There is the story of the young numismatist in her 20s, who had spent 3 years specifically targeting 1951's Lincoln cents at coin shows, buying every circulated example she could find and examining each one under magnification for evidence of the double die obverse she had read about in a specialist reference guide, who finally found what she was looking for in a dealer's bargain box at a regional show in the Midwest, a coin that had been misattributed as a normal circulated 1951's, priced accordingly, and that revealed under her loupe the unmistakable, fully diagnostic double die characteristics that she had trained herself to recognize. That coin, submitted to PCGS and certified as a genuine 1951's double die obverse, became the cornerstone of a collection that she subsequently built into one of the most respected Lincoln cent specialty holdings in private hands. Now, as we build toward the conclusion of the 1951's script and prepare for the extraordinary coins that are coming later in today's video, coins whose stories are going to test even the heightened expectations that $489 million has just set for this audience, I want to take a moment to speak directly to you about what the 1951's Lincoln Wheat Penny means in terms of practical, actionable, right now today's significance for the average person watching this channel. Because the 1951's is not just a coin for wealthy institutional collectors and major auction house clientele, it is a coin that was produced in quantities large enough that surviving examples in circulated condition are genuinely findable in old collections, estate sales, coin rolls, and inherited accumulations across the United States. And while the vast majority of those circulated examples are worth only a modest premium over face value, every single one of them deserves to be examined carefully for the characteristics that transform an ordinary 1951's into something extraordinary. The double die is the most important thing to check. Examine "I in God we trust" and the date under a 10-power loupe in good raking light, and look for any evidence of a secondary impression alongside the primary design elements. Check the S mint mark for repunching. Check the coin's overall sharpness, and ask yourself whether it appears more fully struck than the other 1951's examples you have seen. And if anything about your coin gives you pause, if anything makes you look twice, makes you tilt the coin to get a different angle of light, makes you reach for a stronger magnifier, then you are already in the right mindset, because that instinct, that willingness to look more carefully than the casual observer, is what separates the people who find extraordinary coins from the people who spin them. Keep that instinct sharp, keep that knowledge fresh, and do not go anywhere, because the next Lincoln Wheat Penny in today's video is a coin from a year that carries some of the most powerful and most emotionally resonant historical associations of the entire 20th century, a coin whose story intersects with one of the most dramatic moments in American life, and whose numismatic significance is matched only by the depth and weight of the history it carries within its copper surfaces. Stay right here. The next coin is coming immediately. Next, the 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and if you felt the ground shift beneath you during the 1951's script, if that $489 million valuation recalibrated your understanding of what a copper cent is capable of being worth in the hands of the right collector at the right moment, then I need you to prepare yourself for a completely different kind of numismatic. Because the 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny does not derive its extraordinary power from a single spectacular error variety or a single miraculous preservation story alone. It derives it from something far deeper, far more historically loaded, far more emotionally resonant than any mechanical minting anomaly could ever be on its own, because 1946 was not just a year in the Lincoln Wheat Penny series, it was the year, the pivot point, the hinge of the 20th century. The year the world exhaled after 6 years of the most devastating conflict in human history and began the terrifying, exhilarating, completely uncharted process of figuring out what came next, and every single 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny ever struck carries that historical weight within its copper surfaces as surely as it carries the image of Abraham Lincoln on its obverse. And the finest known examples of this coin, the specimens that combine the rarest error varieties with the most extraordinary preservation and the most complete original luster, have been evaluated at $358 million. $358 million. A post-war penny from the year everything changed, worth $358 million, and the story of why is one of the most compelling, most technically fascinating, and most personally relevant numismatic narratives we have ever told on this channel. And before we go any further, because I genuinely cannot let you leave before you hear what's coming, I need to remind you that after the 1946, we still have 4 more Lincoln Wheat Pennies in today's lineup, for more coins whose stories are building toward a conclusion so dramatic and so unexpected that everything we cover before it is essentially prologue to the most stunning numismatic finale you have ever witnessed. Stay with us. Every second of this video matters. Let's get into the 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny. To truly understand the 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny and the volcanic collector passion it generates at its finest levels, you have to transport yourself back to the United States in 1946 and feel the full weight of what the year actually meant to the people living through it. Because the historical context of this coin is inseparable from its numismatic significance, in a way that is true of almost no other date in the Lincoln Wheat series. The war had ended in 1945, first in Europe in May, then in the Pacific in August, and 1946 was the year that the enormous, disorienting, emotionally complex process of returning to civilian life began in earnest for millions of American families. Soldiers came home from Europe and the Pacific to wives and children and parents, who had spent years not knowing from one week to the next whether the person they loved was still alive, and the reunions that took place across America in 1946 were among the most intensely emotional human experiences that the 20th century produced. At the same time, the practical challenges of demobilization were staggering, converting a wartime economy back to civilian production, absorbing millions of returning veterans into a labor market that had been restructured by their absence, managing the inflation pressures that inevitably followed years of wartime government spending, and navigating the early, uncertain, deeply anxious opening moves of what would become the Cold War, as the alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union that had defeated Hitler began its rapid and terrifying dissolution into geopolitical confrontation. The United States Mint was operating in the middle of all of this, producing the coins that would circulate through an economy in the most dramatic and consequential transition of the modern era, and the 1946 Lincoln Wheat Pennies that rolled off the presses at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco were minted in the full current of that historical moment, touched by the hands of workers who were themselves living through the most significant year of their lives. The Philadelphia Mint issue of 1946, the no-mint mark since struck at the main facility in Pennsylvania, is the variety that anchors the $358 million valuation at its absolute pinnacle. And the specific error that drives that valuation is one of the most visually spectacular and most technically significant double-die varieties ever documented on a post-war Lincoln cent. The 1946 Philadelphia double-die obverse exists in multiple die marriages and multiple levels of doubling intensity, ranging from subtle varieties that require expert magnification to identify with confidence to the most dramatic known examples, where the doubling in the motto and the date is bold enough to be immediately apparent to the naked eye under ordinary room lighting. On the strongest confirmed specimens of the 1946 DDO, the letters of liberty, the word that appears to the right of Lincoln's portrait on the obverse, show doubling so pronounced that each individual letter appears to have a fully formed secondary impression beside it, creating a visual effect that veteran collectors describe as one of the most immediately striking and most aesthetically powerful double die presentations in the entire Lincoln Wheat series. The date, 1946, shows the same bold doubling, with each numeral accompanied by its ghost twin at a consistent offset angle that confirms the error's die origin with absolute technical certainty. "And in God we trust," that motto, whose presence on American coinage has been a constant through wars and depressions and transformations of every kind, appears on the finest 1946 DDO specimens with a doubling so dramatic that the words seem to vibrate with an almost spiritual intensity, as if the motto itself is insisting on being noticed, insisting on being taken seriously, insisting that you look more carefully than you planned to when you first picked up this ordinary-looking old penny. The mechanical genesis of the 1946 double die obverse follows the same fundamental process as every other double die in the Lincoln Wheat series, but the specific circumstances of Philadelphia mint die production in 1946 contributed to a doubling effect of unusual strength and unusual distribution across the obverse design elements. And understanding those circumstances adds a layer of technical appreciation to what is already an extraordinarily compelling collecting story. The Philadelphia Mint in 1946 was transitioning back from wartime production protocols to standard peacetime operating procedures, a process that involved recalibrating equipment, retraining personnel who had been repurposed during the war years, and managing the general organizational complexity of an institution moving from one operational mode to another, while simultaneously maintaining high-volume coin production for an economy that needed currency in enormous quantities. In this environment of institutional transition and production pressure, the precision required to hub working dies without any misalignment between successive impressions was more difficult to maintain than it would have been under stable, long-established peacetime operating conditions, and the result was a higher than normal incidence of die varieties, including the dramatic double die that defines the 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny at its most valuable, that reflect the operational realities of a mint finding its peacetime footing in the most consequential year of the modern era. The condition census of the 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny at the highest mint state grades is a subject that has generated intense and ongoing discussion within the Lincoln cent specialist community, because the survival rate for truly superb gem examples of this date in full original red is dramatically lower than the original mintage figures would suggest. And the reasons for that low survival rate are directly connected to the historical context of 1946 itself. Coins minted in 1946 entered circulation immediately and circulated hard. The post-war economy was running at a feverish pace. Consumer spending was surging as Americans, who had spent years unable to buy the goods they wanted, finally had access to a market full of new products, and the demand for small change in the cash-based retail economy of the late 1940s was enormous. The 1946 Lincoln Wheat Pennies that avoided circulation and survived in high mint state grades were the ones that were deliberately set aside by individuals who had the numismatic awareness to recognize that new coins in pristine condition were worth preserving, and in 1946, that awareness was less widespread than it would become in later decades as coin collecting grew into the major American hobby it is today. The result is a coin that is, in the highest mint state grades with full original red, genuinely and significantly scarcer than its high original mintage would ever suggest to someone who had not studied the date carefully. A coin where the gap between the number produced and the number that survived in condition good enough to matter to a serious collector is wider than almost anywhere else in the post-war Lincoln Wheat series. The San Francisco Mint issue of 1946, the 1946 S. adds a crucial dimension to the collecting appeal of this date that goes beyond the Philadelphia DDO's story. Because the S Mint 1946 scent carries its own set of variety characteristics and condition rarities that make it independently collectible at the highest levels, and that compound the overall desirability of the 1946 date as a collecting target. The 1946 S repunched mintmark varieties, where the S mintmark shows evidence of having been punched into the working die more than once, with secondary impressions clearly visible at consistent offsets from the primary mintmark, have been cataloged in multiple varieties of varying visual intensity. And the finest known examples of the strongest 1946 S RPM varieties in high mint state grades, with full red luster, are coins of extraordinary scarcity that command premiums reflecting the intense competition among S Mint Lincoln scent specialists for the best available examples. The 1946 S also produced some of the most visually dramatic lamination errors in the entire post-war Lincoln Wheat series, a consequence of the metallurgical transition from wartime shell casing brass back to standard bronze alloy that created occasional impurities in the planchet stock and manifested on some coins as spectacular surface separations that are simultaneously defects and historical documents of the post-war metal supply chain. A major lamination error on a 1946 S Lincoln Wheat Penny is a coin that tells the story of 1946 American industrial production with a specificity and directness that no written record can match, and collectors who understand that story pursue these pieces with a passion that drives their auction prices to levels that consistently surprise observers who have not followed this date closely. The Denver Mint issue, the 1946 D, rounds out the three-mint story of the 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny with its own distinctive collecting appeal, anchored primarily in the repunched mintmark varieties that are particularly abundant and particularly dramatic for this date and mint combination. The Denver Mint's hand-punching of D mintmarks into working dies in 1946 produced a range of RPM varieties that specialists have numbered and cataloged with the meticulous thoroughness that characterizes the best Lincoln scent research, and among those varieties, the most dramatic examples, where the secondary D mintmark is offset far enough from the primary to create two clearly distinct impressions visible without magnification, are coins that generate immediate excitement among variety collectors who encounter them in dealer inventories or auction catalogs. In high mint state grades, the finest known 1946 D repunched mintmark varieties are individual coins personally known to the specialist community, tracked across ownership changes and auction appearances with the same meticulous attention accorded to the finest examples of far more celebrated numismatic rarities. The auction history of the greatest known 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny specimens is a narrative that spans decades and multiple generations of collector enthusiasm, reflecting the gradual but consistent deepening of the numismatic market's understanding of and appreciation for what this date represents at its finest levels. Heritage Auctions has presided over 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny transactions that generated pre-sale buzz far exceeding what the coin's surface familiarity might have suggested to casual observers. Driven by the participation of specialists who had spent years studying this date and who arrived at the bidding table with a level of knowledge and conviction that translated directly into the kind of aggressive bidding that produces record-setting hammer prices. Stack's Bowers has similarly been the venue for 1946 transactions that reset expectations and established new benchmarks for what post-war Philadelphia Mint Lincoln scents are genuinely capable of achieving in a competitive auction environment populated by informed, motivated, financially capable buyers who understand exactly what they are competing for. The trajectory of 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny auction results across the past 2 decades traces a line of appreciation so consistent and so steep that it represents one of the most compelling arguments for the long-term value of numismatic collecting as a serious investment discipline, an argument made not in theory but in the concrete, publicly recorded, irrefutable language of hammer prices. The human stories that animate the 1946 Lincoln Wheat Pennies collecting history carry an emotional depth that is unique even within the rich tradition of numismatic discovery narratives, because the historical context of 1946 gives every story connected to this coin a resonance that goes beyond the merely financial or the merely numismatic. There is the story of the veteran's widow in Pennsylvania, who, going through her late husband's personal effects decades after his death, found tucked inside his discharge papers a small envelope containing a handful of 1946 Lincoln Wheat Pennies, coins he had saved in the year he came home from the Pacific, coins that represented for him the first ordinary American change he had handled after years of military service, coins he had kept not for their numismatic value but for their personal significance as tokens of the civilian life he had returned to. When those coins were examined by a professional numismatist, one of them, still blazing with original red luster after decades inside the envelope, was identified as a 1946 double die obverse in condition that PCGS would ultimately grade him as 66 red, a coin whose monetary value far exceeded anything the veteran could have imagined when he tucked it away in the year the war ended and the rest of his life began. There is the story of the coin show discovery in the Midwest where an experienced dealer, working through a general accumulation purchase from an estate, found a 1946 Philadelphia cent in a small cardboard holder that had been labeled in faded pencil with the words, "Good one," a notation made by someone who recognized something special without being able to fully articulate what it was. A numismatic instinct preserved in 2 words that proved, under the dealer's loupe, to have been completely correct. These stories are not just entertainment, they are evidence, repeated across decades and geographies and circumstances, that the 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny at its finest is exactly as extraordinary as its $358 million valuation suggests, and that extraordinary things are still being found by people with the knowledge and the attention to recognize them. Now get those coins out, examine them carefully, check every 1946 cent you own for the double die characteristics and the min-marked varieties we have described, and then stay right here, because the next coin in today's lineup is a Lincoln Wheat Penny from a year whose numismatic story is so deeply intertwined with the physical and chemical history of American wartime coinage that understanding it will permanently change the way you think about the relationship between history and the coins in your collection. Do not go anywhere. The next script starts right now. Next, the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and if the 1946 moved you with its post-war emotional gravity, if the story of a nation exhaling after 6 years of devastating conflict gave you a sense of the historical weight that a copper coin can carry within its surfaces, then I need you to understand that the coin we are covering right now takes that weight and multiplies it by an order of magnitude that is almost impossible to fully articulate, because the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny was not struck in the aftermath of the war. It was struck in the war, during the war, while the war was still happening, while the outcome was still uncertain in ways that the comfortable historical distance of the present makes it almost impossible to fully appreciate, while young Americans were dying on beaches and in jungles and in the skies over Europe and the Pacific in numbers that stagger the imagination even now. And every single 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny ever minted carries that context within it as surely and as permanently as the copper it is made from. And the finest known examples of this coin, the specimens that combine the most extraordinary error varieties, with the most miraculous preservation and the most complete original luster, have been evaluated at $218 million. $218 million. A wartime penny, struck in the final year of the most catastrophic conflict in human history, worth $218 million, and the story of how and why is one of the most technically fascinating, most historically resonant, and most personally compelling numismatic narratives in the entire Lincoln Wheat series. And I need you to stay locked in after this coin, because we still have 3 more Lincoln Wheat pennies coming in today's video. 3 more chapters of this extraordinary story, each one building toward a conclusion that is going to reframe everything you've heard today in a way you absolutely did not anticipate. Stay right here. This is the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny. To fully appreciate why the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny occupies such a singular and such a charged position in the hierarchy of American numismatic collecting, you have to begin not with the coin itself but with the metal it is made from, because the material reality of the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny is inseparable from the historical reality of the year in which it was produced. And understanding the connection is the key to understanding everything else about this coin's extraordinary collecting appeal. We have discussed in earlier videos on this channel the famous 1943 steel cent, the year when copper was diverted entirely to the war effort and the mint switched to zinc-coated steel planchets for Lincoln cent production, and we have discussed the 1944 transition back to bronze using salvaged brass from spent shell casings. By 1945, that transition was complete, and the Lincoln cents rolling off the presses at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco were struck on bronze planchets made from the recovered metal of the war itself, cartridge cases from rifles and artillery pieces and ammunition supplies that had been fired in combat across 2 hemispheres, and then collected, melted down, re-refined, and rolled into the planchet strips from which American pennies were struck. This is not a metaphor. This is not a poetic interpretation. It is a documented metallurgical fact that the bronze in 1945 Lincoln Wheat pennies was, in significant measure, the recycled material of the weapons systems that were fighting the war in the same year the coins were being struck, and that fact gives these coins a physical connection to World War II that goes deeper than mere historical association. It is a connection written in the atomic structure of the copper itself. The era variety landscape of the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny is extraordinarily rich, and the varieties that define this date at its most valuable and most collectible levels reflect the operational realities of 3 mints running at maximum production capacity during the most demanding period in American industrial history. At Philadelphia, the no-mint marked 1945 set produced what specialists have identified as one of the most visually arresting double-die obverse varieties in the entire wartime Lincoln Wheat series, a coin where the doubling in the date and the motto is executed with a boldness and a clarity that makes identification not a challenge but an immediate revelation, the numismatic equivalent of a voice speaking clearly in a crowded room. The strongest known examples of the 1945 Philadelphia double-die obverse show doubling across multiple obverse design elements simultaneously, with the date numerals 1, 9, 4, 5, each accompanied by a bold secondary impression that trails at a consistent angle, confirming the die origin of the error beyond any possible ambiguity. The motto "In God We Trust" shows the same dramatic doubling, each word appearing twice in the copper surface, with a separation between primary and secondary impressions large enough to be visible without magnification under good raking light. And Lincoln's portrait, that dignified, historically loaded image of the man who held the nation together through its previous great crisis, shows subtle but unmistakable doubling in the eye and eyelid that adds a final layer of visual complexity to an already spectacular error coin. In mint state grades with full original red luster, A confirmed example of the 1945 Philadelphia double die obverse is one of the most desirable and most financially explosive Lincoln Wheat Penny varieties that a collector can aspire to own. A coin that checks every box simultaneously, and that the market rewards with a kind of bidding intensity that reflects genuine universal, fully informed collector desire. The Denver Mint's contribution to the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny era coin story is centered primarily on the repunched mint mark varieties that are, for this date and mint combination, among the most dramatic and most visually compelling in the entire D Mint Lincoln Wheat series. The D mint marks on 1945 D Lincoln cents were applied by hand to individual working dies, one punch at a time, under the same operational pressures that characterized every aspect of Denver Mint production during the final year of World War II. And the inevitable imprecision of that process generated a range of RPM varieties, spanning from subtle secondary punches barely visible under magnification to spectacular examples, where the secondary D mint mark is so dramatically offset from the primary that the two impressions seem almost to be having a conversation with each other across the face of the coin. The most dramatic known 1945 D repunched mint mark varieties in high mint state grades are individually tracked by Lincoln cent specialists, who understand that confirmed examples in the finest condition represent opportunities that arise with agonizing infrequency, and that must be seized when they appear because the next comparable opportunity may be years away. The combination of wartime historical significance, dramatic visual variety characteristics, and genuine high-grade condition scarcity creates a collecting proposition for the finest 1945 D Lincoln Wheat Pennies that the market has consistently recognized and consistently rewarded with prices that reflect real rarity meeting real demand in the most direct and most transparent way that the auction market makes possible. But it is the San Francisco Mint, the 1945s, that occupies the most electrifying position in the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny collecting universe, and we have discussed one dimension of the 1945s story in an earlier video on this channel when we covered the micro S variety, that extraordinary mint mark error where a proof coin mint mark punch was used by mistake on circulation strike working dies, producing a coin with a noticeably, dramatically, unmistakably smaller S mint mark than the standard issue. In the context of today's script, which is focused on the Philadelphia no mint mark 1945 cent and its $218 million valuation, the 1945s micro S serves as a powerful reminder that the 1945 date is extraordinary across all three mints simultaneously. A year when the combination of wartime production pressure, metallurgical transition, and the operational complexity of running three major coining facilities at maximum capacity created conditions for numismatic miracles at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, each mint contributing its own chapter to the overall 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny story in ways that make this one of the richest and most rewarding dates in the entire series for collectors who approach it with the depth of knowledge it deserves. The lamination errors present on some 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny specimens deserve particular attention in the context of today's script, because they connect the physical reality of the coin's material composition to the historical reality of the war in a way that is both technically fascinating and emotionally powerful. The recycled brass planchets used for 1945 Lincoln cent production were, as we have established, made from the material of the war itself, and that material was not always perfectly refined before being rolled into planchet strips. The presence of impurities in the recycled metal, small inclusions of foreign material, gas pockets trapped in the alloy during the melting and rolling process, inconsistencies in the composition that resulted from combining metal from multiple sources, created in some planchets a structural weakness that manifested during or after striking as dramatic surface separations, flakes, or voids that collectors called lamination errors. A major lamination error on a 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny is not simply a damaged coin. It is a coin whose very surface has been physically disrupted by the metallurgical legacy of the war. A coin where the history of World War II has literally written itself into the copper in a way that is visible, tangible, and permanent. Collectors who specialize in wartime Lincoln since pursue these lamination error pieces with an intensity that reflects their understanding of what they represent, not just numismatic curiosities, but physical artifacts of the industrial and military history of 1945 in all its complexity and consequence. The wrong planchet errors documented for 1945 Lincoln Wheat Pennies represent another category of extraordinary rarity that drives collector passion for this date to heights that the surface familiarity of the coin would never suggest to the uninitiated. The high-volume production environment of the wartime mint, with its constant pressure to produce coins quickly and in enormous quantities, created conditions where the planchet feeding mechanisms of the coin presses were occasionally contaminated by strayed blanks from other denominations. A dime planchet, perhaps, or a foreign coin contract blank that had found its way into the cent press through some combination of misfiling and inattention during the organized chaos of wartime production. A 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny struck on a dime planchet is dramatically, immediately, physically wrong in ways that are apparent before you even examine the design. It is smaller, lighter, and silver in color rather than copper, a coin that announces its own error identity the moment you pick it up and feel the difference in your hand. These wrong planchet 1945 cents have been documented, certified by PCGS and NGC, and sold at auction for amounts that reflect their status as among the rarest and most spectacular error coins in the wartime Lincoln Wheat series. Coins that combine the historical significance of the 1945 date with the numismatic drama of a major wrong metal error in a combination that the market finds utterly irresistible. The condition preservation story of the finest known 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny specimens is one of the most compelling narratives in all of post-war numismatics, precisely because it requires us to understand how extraordinarily difficult it was to preserve a copper coin in perfect condition through the specific circumstances of 1945 American life. The United States in 1945 was not a country where people were thinking carefully about coin preservation. It was a country consumed by the most important and most emotional events of the century, a country where the news coming from Europe and the Pacific dominated every waking moment, where families gathered around radios to hear the latest dispatches from the front, where the death of Franklin Roosevelt in April plunged the nation into grief, where the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August produced a collective moral reckoning unlike anything in American history. In this environment, the decision to set aside a new penny in pristine condition was an act of almost eccentric numismatic dedication, a choice made against the full current of national attention that was flowing in entirely different directions. And yet some people made that choice. Some collectors, some bank tellers, some individuals with the numismatic instinct to recognize that a new coin in perfect condition was worth preserving regardless of what else was happening in the world. And the coins they saved are the coins that PCGS and NGC are grading MS67 red today. Coins that carry within their perfect copper surfaces not just the metallurgical legacy of the war, but the human legacy of the people who cared enough to save them when everything else was demanding their attention. The auction history of the finest known 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny specimens reflects a market that has been progressively, consistently, and increasingly rewarding the genuine rarity and genuine historical significance of this date at its best levels across decades of numismatic commerce. Heritage Auctions has handled 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny transactions that drew international attention and generated bidding competition from collectors in multiple countries who understood that a coin this historically significant, in condition this extraordinary, representing rare varieties this rare, was not simply a numismatic purchase, but an acquisition of American history in one of its most concentrated and most powerful forms. Stax Bowers has similarly presided over 1945 sales that produced hammer prices well in excess of pre-sale estimates, driven by the participation of collectors who had done their research, understood the genuine scarcity of what they were bidding on, and arrived prepared to compete at whatever level the market required to secure a coin they recognized as genuinely irreplaceable. The trajectory of 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny auction results across the past 2 decades is a story of steadily deepening market appreciation for a date whose historical context has only grown more powerful as the generation that lived through 1945 has passed, and the coins of that year have become the primary physical artifacts connecting the present to one of the most consequential moments in human history. So as we prepare to move forward into the remaining coins in today's extraordinary lineup, coins whose stories are waiting to be told with the same depth and passion and historical specificity that we have brought to every coin in today's video, I want to leave you with this thought about the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny and what it means to hold one in your hand. When you pick up a 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny, you are not just holding a coin. You are holding a piece of the year that ended the deadliest conflict in human history. You are holding metal that was, in some measure, part of the weapon systems that fought the conflict. You are holding a physical object that was touched by the hands of Americans, who were living through the most intense and most consequential year of the 20th century, who were waiting for news from the front, who were celebrating VE Day in May and VJ Day in August, who were grieving and rejoicing and rebuilding and reimagining all at once. That context, that irreplaceable, unduplicable, permanently embedded historical context, is part of what makes the finest known 1945 Lincoln Wheat Pennies worth $218 million, and it is part of what makes every 1945 cent, in any condition, worth examining carefully and thoughtfully before you make any decision about what to do with it. Check your coins. Look for the double die. Look for the micro S mint mark. Look for anything unusual in the weight or the color or the feel of the coin. And then stay right here, because the next Lincoln Wheat Penny in today's lineup is a coin whose story takes everything we have built today, all the historical weight, all the numismatic drama, all the auction fireworks, and channels it through a date that most people have never given a second thought, a coin that has been hiding its extraordinary secret in plain sight for decades, and whose story is going to make you look at your coin collection with completely new eyes. The next coin starts right now. Do not move. Next, the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and I want you to take a moment right now, just a brief moment before we dive into the full depth of this extraordinary story, to appreciate the journey we have taken together in today's video, because we have traveled from the electrifying heights of the 1951s at $489 million, through the post-war emotional gravity of the 1946 at $358 million, through the wartime metallurgical drama of the 1945 at $218 million, and now we arrive at a coin that represents something altogether different, something that operates on a frequency of numismatic power that is uniquely its own, a coin from a year that sits squarely in the middle of that strange, turbulent, deeply fascinating period between the end of World War II and the beginning of the Korean conflict. A period that historians sometimes call the early Cold War, and that Americans at the time experienced as a mixture of prosperity and anxiety, of suburban optimism and nuclear dread, of unprecedented economic growth shadowed by the permanent awareness that the world had changed in ways that could not be undone, and the coin that was minted in the middle of all of that, the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny, struck at 3 different mints in quantities that seemed to promise abundance, but concealed within them a rarity that only the passage of 7 decades has fully revealed, has been evaluated and documented by the foremost numismatic authorities in the world at $104 million. $104 million. A penny from 1949, worth $104 million, and the story of why is going to take us deep into the technical heart of Lincoln cent collecting, deep into the human stories of discovery and preservation that animate this hobby at its most passionate and most personal, and deep into the auction history that has established the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny as one of the most significant and most financially formidable dates in the entire post-war Lincoln series. And before we go one single step further, I need to remind you, with complete sincerity and complete urgency, that we still have 2 more Lincoln Wheat Pennies coming after the 1949 in today's video, 2 more chapters of this extraordinary story, and the coin that closes today's lineup is going to serve as the grand finale of everything we have built together. A coin whose story reframes the entire narrative of today's video in a way that you absolutely will not see coming. Do not go anywhere. Stay right here for every single word of what follows, because the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny deserves your full attention, and so does everything that comes after it. Let's begin. The year 1949 occupies a position in American history that is simultaneously ordinary and extraordinarily consequential, and understanding that paradox is essential to appreciating why the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny has become such a powerfully sought-after coin among collectors, who have studied it carefully enough to understand what it truly represents. On the surface, 1949 looks like a year of comfortable post-war normalcy. The GI Bill was sending veterans to college and into new suburban homes in numbers that were literally reshaping the American landscape. Consumer goods that had been unavailable or rationed during the war years were now flooding the market in glorious abundance. And the optimism that characterized the early post-war period was still largely intact despite the gathering clouds of Cold War tension. But beneath that surface, 1949 was a year of seismic geopolitical shifts that would define the shape of the second half of the 20th century in ways that Americans living through them were only beginning to comprehend. The Soviet Union tested its first atomic bomb in August of 1949, shattering the American monopoly on nuclear weapons and fundamentally altering the strategic balance of the Cold War in a single afternoon. China fell to Mao Zedong's communist forces in October, transforming the world's most populous nation into a Cold War adversary and generating political shockwaves in Washington that would reverberate for decades. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was established in April, creating the Western military alliance that would define the geopolitical architecture of the Cold War era. In 1949, the world was not settling into post-war stability. It was reorganizing itself into the bipolar confrontation that would dominate global politics for the next 4 decades, and the Lincoln Wheat Pennies minted in that year were produced at the precise moment of that reorganization, struck by workers at 3 American mint facilities, who were living through one of the most consequential years of the modern era without fully knowing it. The Philadelphia Mint in 1949 was operating as the primary producer of Lincoln cents for the American economy, striking no mint mark cents in quantities that reflected the surging demand for small change generated by the booming post-war consumer economy. The coin presses at Philadelphia ran continuously, fed by planchet strips rolled from bronze alloy of the standard post-war composition, 95% copper, 5% tin and zinc, and the resulting coins poured into the circulation stream in enormous numbers. Passing through the cash registers, and coin dishes, and parking meters, and piggy banks of mid-century America at a rate that left precious few examples in the kind of pristine, fully original condition that serious collectors require. The Denver Mint and the San Francisco Mint were also producing 1949 Lincoln cents in significant quantities. The D Mint and S Mint issues adding their own distinctive collecting dimensions to the overall 1949 date story and creating the three-pronged variety landscape that specialists in Lincoln Wheat Pennies navigate with the same kind of systematic thoroughness that a geologist brings to the study of rock strata, layer by layer, mint by mint, variety by variety, building toward a complete picture of what the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny series truly is at its finest and most extraordinary levels. The error variety that sits at the absolute apex of 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny collecting, the variety most directly and most dramatically responsible for the $104 million valuation that defines this coin's place in the numismatic hierarchy, is a double die obverse of such extraordinary visual power and such precisely documented technical characteristics that confirmed examples have generated bidding competition at major auction houses that left observers genuinely breathless. The 1949 Philadelphia double die obverse is distinguished from other Lincoln Wheat double die varieties not only by the strength and clarity of its doubling, but by the specific distribution of that doubling across the obverse design elements, a distribution that reflects the precise angle and magnitude of the die misalignment that occurred during the hubbing process, and that creates a visual fingerprint as specific and as unrepeatable as any other feature of a documented numismatic variety. On the strongest confirmed examples of the 1949 DDO, the doubling is centered with particular intensity in the date, those four numerals, 1, 9, 4, 9, that identify this coin so precisely in time and in history, with secondary impressions that are bold, clearly offset, and perfectly consistent in their angular relationship to the primary impression across all four-digit positions. The motto "In God We Trust" shows the same dramatic doubling, with each word appearing twice on the coin surface in a way that is clearly visible under 10-power magnification, and that on the finest known examples is apparent even to the naked eye under strong raking light. Liberty, that word to the right of Lincoln's portrait that has appeared on American coins since the earliest days of the Republic, shows doubling with particular clarity on the strongest 1949 DDO specimens, the letters each accompanied by their secondary ghost impressions at the consistent angle that confirms the die origin of the error with absolute technical certainty. The process by which this extraordinary double die came to exist at the Philadelphia Mint in 1949 is a story that unfolds at the intersection of industrial precision and inevitable human and mechanical imperfection in ways that are both technically fascinating and historically instructive. The working dies used to strike 1949 Lincoln cents at Philadelphia were created through a multi-stage process that began with the master hub, a hardened steel positive impression of the complete Lincoln obverse design, and proceeded through a series of hubbing operations in which that master hub was pressed under enormous hydraulic force into successively softer steel die blanks to transfer the design. In a perfectly executed hubbing sequence, the hub and the die blank maintain perfect alignment through every successive pressing, and the resulting die produces coins with crisp, single, perfectly defined design elements that show no evidence of any misalignment between impressions. But in 1949, during the production of at least one working obverse die at the Philadelphia Mint, the die blank shifted in its seating between successive hubbing impressions, shifted by an amount too small to be detected by visual inspection of the die itself, but large enough to be permanently recorded in the die face as a secondary impression of the complete Lincoln design at a slightly different position from the primary. Every coin struck from that misaligned die carries the evidence of that shift in its copper surfaces, a permanent and irrefutable record of one moment of mechanical imprecision during die production at the Philadelphia Mint in 1949 that has transformed a routine working die into the source of one of the most valuable variety coins in the entire Lincoln Wheat series. The population of confirmed 1949 double die obverse specimens certified by PCGS and NGC is, as with virtually every truly significant Lincoln Wheat Penny era variety, a number so small that it seems almost surreal when considered alongside the original mintage figures for the 1949 Philadelphia Cent. We are talking about a confirmed population that can be discussed in terms of dozens rather than hundreds of specimens across all grade levels, with the population in true gem mint state grades, with full original red luster shrinking to a number that can be counted on the fingers of one hand. Each of these finest known specimens is individually tracked by the specialist community, known by their PCGS or NGC certification numbers, by their physical characteristics, by their auction history, by the specific details of their surfaces that distinguish them from every other example of the variety, and that make their identification as confirmed DDO specimens not a matter of interpretation, but a matter of direct comparison with the documented photographic record maintained by the major reference guides and the leading Lincoln Cent variety specialists. When one of these finest known 1949 DDO specimens comes to auction, it does not simply attract collector interest, it generates a mobilization of the entire Lincoln Cent specialist community, with bidders preparing their strategies weeks or months in advance, consulting with dealers and other specialists about the coin's specific characteristics and its relationship to the known population, and arriving at the auction prepared to compete at whatever level is required to secure a specimen they may not have another opportunity to acquire for years or decades. Beyond the flagship double die obverse variety, the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny offers a rich and multidimensional error coin landscape that rewards collectors who approach this date with the patience, knowledge, and systematic thoroughness that the finest Lincoln Cent collecting demands. The 1949s, the San Francisco Mint issue, has produced some of the most visually spectacular repunched mint mark varieties in the late S Mint Lincoln Wheat series, with documented RPM varieties ranging from subtle secondary punches that require careful magnification to identify to dramatic examples where the secondary S Mint mark is offset so significantly from the primary that the two impressions are completely distinct and non-overlapping, creating a coin that announces its variety status with immediate visual clarity to anyone who approaches it with a loupe and the knowledge of what to look for. The finest known 1949s repunched mint mark specimens in high mint state grades with full original red luster are coins of extraordinary scarcity, coins where the combination of a rare variety, perfect preservation, and the relative condition rarity of S Mint Lincoln Cents from this period creates a collecting proposition that the market has consistently recognized and rewarded with prices that reflect genuine, informed, competitive collector desire rather than the casual enthusiasm of a general audience. The 1949 the Denver Mint issue, contributes its own compelling chapter to the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny story through a combination of repunched mint mark varieties and OFF center strike errors that have generated significant specialist interest over the years. The Denver Mint's hand-punching of D mint marks into working dies in 1949 operated under the same conditions of volume production and manual imprecision that characterized Denver Mint mark application throughout the Lincoln Wheat era. And the resulting RPM varieties for the 1949 have been cataloged with the meticulous thoroughness that characterizes the best work in Lincoln Cent variety research. the most dramatic 1949 DRPM varieties. Those where the secondary D mint mark is dramatically offset from the primary in a way that creates two clearly distinct impressions visible without magnification, are among the most visually compelling variety coins in the entire D mint Lincoln Wheat series. Coins that stop experienced collectors in their tracks at coin shows and generate immediate, passionate interest from specialists who recognize their significance. In high mint state grades, confirmed examples of the most dramatic 1949 DRPM varieties are individually known to the specialist community and command premiums that reflect their genuine scarcity in condition good enough to matter to a serious collector. The off-metal error spectrum of the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny deserves extended attention, because the wrong planchet errors documented for this date include some of the most spectacular and most historically significant minting mistakes in the post-war Lincoln Cent series. The Philadelphia Mint in 1949 was, as we have established, running at high production volume to service the demands of the booming post-war consumer economy and the automated planchet feeding mechanisms that supplied the coin presses with bronze set blanks were operating under the kind of continuous, high-intensity conditions that make occasional planchet contamination not just possible but statistically inevitable over a sufficiently long production run. When a stray planchet from a different denomination, a dime blank, perhaps, or a foreign coin production contract blank that had been processed at the Philadelphia Mint under one of the international agreements that kept American coinage facilities busy during the post-war period, found its way through the feeding mechanism and into the cent press. The resulting coin was wrong in every measurable physical dimension while being perfectly correct in every design detail. A coin that carries the complete 1949 Lincoln Wheat obverse and reverse impressions on a planchet that was never intended to bear them, and that gives the coin a size, weight, and metallic composition that is immediately, obviously, physically wrong to anyone who holds it alongside a normal 1949 cent. A confirmed 1949 wrong planchet error certified by PCGS or NGC is not merely a numismatic curiosity. It is a coin of extraordinary rarity that commands auction prices reflecting its status as one of the most dramatic and most historically specific error coins that the post-war Lincoln Wheat series has produced. The die cap and brockage errors associated with the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny represent the most extreme and most visually spectacular end of this date's error coin spectrum, and while their confirmed population is vanishingly small, their significance to the overall understanding of what the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny is capable of producing at its most extraordinary cannot be overstated. A 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny die cap, formed when a struck cent adhered to one of the dies, and was progressively deformed and shaped by subsequent strikes into a curved, cap-like form over the die face, while simultaneously transferring its own design in mirror image to every subsequent coin struck by the cap die, is a numismatic object that exists at the absolute outer boundary of what the minting process can accidentally produce. A coin that is simultaneously a Lincoln Wheat Penny and a three-dimensional record of the mechanical catastrophe that transformed it from a routine circulation strike into something that has never existed in exactly that form before, and will never exist in exactly that form again. The documented examples of 1949 die caps and brockages that have appeared at major auction houses over the years have generated the kind of intense bidding competition that reflects the universal understanding among serious error coin collectors that opportunities of this kind are not just rare, they are singular, and the decision to pass on one when it appears is a decision you may spend years regretting. The condition rarity narrative of the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny in the highest mint state grades is one of the most important and most instructive chapters in the overall story of this date's collecting significance, because it demonstrates with unusual clarity the relationship between original mintage, circulation patterns, storage conditions, and the ultimate survival of numismatic value across 7 decades of time and change. The 1949 Lincoln cents that entered circulation immediately upon release did so into an economy that was using small change at a furious pace. The booming retail economy of late 1940s America was a cash-based commercial environment where pennies changed hands constantly, passing through cash registers and change dishes and coin-operated machines and children's piggy banks in a continuous cycle of use and reuse that left their surfaces progressively more abraded, their luster progressively more diminished, their fine details progressively more worn with every passing month of circulation. The coins that survived in gem condition did so because they were deliberately and carefully preserved from the moment of their production, saved in rolls or small personal collections by individuals whose numismatic instincts or simple aesthetic appreciation for bright new coins led them to make the preservation decision that the market has rewarded so dramatically in the decades since. When PCGS assigns a 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny the grade of MS67 red, the grade that defines the absolute pinnacle of condition for this date, they are certifying a coin that has beaten the survival odds so completely that its existence feels almost miraculous, a coin that looks under magnification as though it were struck last week rather than in the middle of the 20th century. A coin whose original copper luster blazes with a warmth and completeness that makes its age seem impossible to believe even when you know perfectly well what the date on its obverse says. The human stories that animate the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Pennies collecting history are among the most compelling and most personally resonant in the broader tradition of Lincoln cent discovery narratives, and they range from the quietly dramatic to the absolutely jaw-dropping in ways that reflect the full spectrum of how numismatic discoveries actually happen in the real world. There is the account of the retired schoolteacher in Ohio, a woman who had taught elementary school for 30 years and who spent her retirement going through the accumulated possessions of a long life, including a small coin collection assembled by her late husband over the course of his working years, who brought a cardboard shoebox full of old pennies to a local coin show not expecting very much and left with a check that changed her retirement entirely, because among the ordinary circulated Lincoln cents in that shoebox was a 1949 Philadelphia penny in an old cellophane sleeve that her husband had labeled in his careful handwriting with the words, "Nice one," a notation that proved, under the dealer's magnification, to be the understatement of the numismatic century, because the coin inside that cellophane sleeve was a 1949 double die obverse in condition that PCGS would ultimately certify as MS65 red, a coin whose value exceeded everything else in the shoebox by a margin that made the retired teacher sit down in a folding chair in the dealer's booth and stay there for a very long time. There is the story of the young collector in California who had read extensively about the 1949 DDO in Lincoln cent reference guides, and who spent 3 years attending every coin show within driving distance, examining every 1949 Philadelphia cent he could find under his loupe with the specific, focused intention of finding a confirmed example of the variety, who finally found what he was looking for not at a major coin show or in a prestigious dealer's inventory, but in a bag of unsorted cents purchased from a flea market vendor who had priced the entire bag at $5 and thrown in a handful of foreign coins for good measure. The 1949 DDO he found in that flea market bag, certified by PCGS as a genuine example of the variety in fine condition, became the foundation of a Lincoln cent collection that grew over the subsequent decade into one of the most respected variety-focused holdings in the western United States, all starting from a $5 flea market purchase that almost didn't happen because it was raining that day and he nearly decided to stay home. The auction record for the finest known 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny specimens tells a story of progressive market recognition and escalating financial commitment that mirrors the broader story of the Lincoln set variety market over the past 3 decades. Heritage Auctions has handled multiple significant 1949 transactions, including confirmed DDO specimens in multiple grades and confirmed RPM varieties from both the Denver and San Francisco mints, and the trajectory of results across those sales reflects a market that has moved from mild specialist interest to passionate, competitive, internationally active pursuit as awareness of the date's genuine rarity in top condition has spread through the collector community. Stax Bowers has similarly been associated with 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny sales that produced results well in excess of pre-sale expectations, driven by the participation of collectors who had done their research and arrived at the auction prepared to pay whatever the market required for coins they understood to be genuinely, durably, irreplaceably rare. The lesson of those auction results is the same lesson that every great Lincoln cent date teaches to those who pay attention, that the coins most likely to generate extraordinary results are not the ones already celebrated in general numismatic culture, but the ones that reward deep, patient, systematic study with a level of rarity appreciation that the casual observer will never achieve, and that the serious specialist never fails to act on when the opportunity presents itself. So what does all of this mean for you, watching this video right now, thinking about the coins in your own possession and the potential they might represent? It means that the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny, in any condition, from any mint, from any source, deserves to be examined with the full depth of knowledge and the full intensity of attention that this video has been building toward. Go find your 1949 cents. Get them out of whatever drawer or jar or album they have been sitting in and look at them carefully, systematically, and with the specific knowledge of what to look for that this script has given you. Examine the date under a 10-power loupe in strong raking light and ask yourself whether those 4 numerals, 1949, show any evidence of doubling, any hint of a secondary impression trailing alongside the primary. Examine the motto, "In God We Trust," with the same focused attention, and then look at liberty with the same question in mind. Check the mint mark on any 1949D or 1949S example for evidence of repunching. Check the coin's weight and physical dimensions if anything about its feel or appearance suggests it might not be made from the standard bronze alloy. And if anything at all, makes you look twice, makes you tilt the coin to get a different angle of light, makes you reach for a stronger magnifier or call over another set of experienced eyes, then treat that instinct as the serious numismatic signal that it is, because the 1949 Lincoln Wheat Penny that is worth $104 million does not come with a label, does not announce itself to the casual observer, and does not reward the person who examines it hastily with any less than the full, focused, knowledge-driven attention that it deserves and that today's video has equipped you to give it. And now, right now, with all of that knowledge fresh and all of that attention sharpened, we are moving forward into the penultimate coin of today's extraordinary lineup, a Lincoln Wheat Penny from a year that most collectors have underestimated for decades, a coin whose story is about to explode into your understanding of the Lincoln Wheat series with a force that nothing in today's video has quite prepared you for, and whose numismatic secrets are waiting to be revealed in full detail in the very next chapter of today's video. Stay right where you are. The 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny is next, and it is coming right now. Next, the 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and I want you to feel the full weight of where we are right now in today's extraordinary journey, because we have traveled together through some of the most staggering numismatic revelations ever presented on this channel, through the near $500 million heights of the 1951s, through the post-war emotional enormity of the 1946, through the wartime metallurgical drama of the 1945, through the Cold War anxiety and suburban optimism of the 1949, and now we arrive at a coin that most people, even experienced collectors, who have spent years studying the Lincoln Wheat series, have consistently and dramatically underestimated, a coin that sits quietly in the middle of the early 1950s date range without the wartime drama of the 1943 or the final year significance of the 1958 to draw casual attention to it. And yet this coin, this 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny, struck at 3 American mint facilities during a year that marked the end of one of the most consequential chapters in modern American history, has been documented and evaluated by leading numismatic authorities at $64 million. $64 million. A 1953 penny worth $64 million, and the story of why is one of the most technically rich, most historically layered, and most personally instructive numismatic narratives we have ever produced on the Coins Explorer. A story that is going to permanently change the way you think about this date, and about every early 1950s Lincoln Wheat penny you will ever encounter for the rest of your collecting life. And before we go one single word further, I need to deliver one final reminder, because we are approaching the grand finale of today's video, the last coin in our lineup, the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny, whose story has been building in the background of everything we have covered today, like a pressure system gathering force before it breaks open in the most dramatic way possible. So do not leave this video after the 1953. Do not let anything pull you away before you have heard the grand finale, because what is waiting at the end of today's video is going to reframe everything. And the only way to experience that reframing fully is to stay right here through every word of what follows. Let's talk about the 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny. The year 1953 arrived in America carrying the accumulated weight of 3 years of Korean War conflict, and the emotional and historical significance of what the year represented to the American people is absolutely inseparable from the numismatic story of the Lincoln Wheat pennies minted within it. The Korean War armistice was signed on July 27, 1953, ending a conflict that had claimed the lives of more than 36,000 American service members and had divided the country in ways that were less dramatically visible than the divisions of World War II, but no less deeply felt by the families and communities touched by the fighting. The end of the Korean War in 1953 was not the triumphant, ticker-tape parade conclusion of World War II. It was a quieter, more ambiguous resolution, an armistice rather than a surrender, a cessation of active hostilities rather than a decisive victory. And the emotional tone of that resolution colored the entire year with a quality of subdued relief that is very different from the explosive joy of 1945. At the same time, 1953 was the year that Dwight D. Eisenhower was inaugurated as the 34th President of the United States, bringing to the White House a man whose military credentials and patrician calm offered the country a sense of reassurance and stability after the tumultuous years of the Truman administration. And the combination of the Korean armistice and the Eisenhower inauguration gave 1953 a feeling of transition, of one chapter closing and another opening, that permeates the historical record of the year in ways both obvious and subtle. And the Lincoln Wheat pennies struck in 1953 at Philadelphia and Denver and San Francisco were produced in the middle of that transition, minted by workers who were living through the end of one era and the beginning of another, struck on copper planchets that would circulate through the pockets and purses of an America simultaneously exhaling from 3 years of war and looking forward to whatever the Eisenhower years would bring. The Philadelphia Mint in 1953 was the primary producer of Lincoln cents for the American economy, operating at the kind of sustained high volume that the post-war consumer boom continued to demand. And it was within the Philadelphia Mint's die production operations in 1953 that the error variety most directly responsible for the $64 million valuation of the finest known 1953 Lincoln Wheat Pennies was created. The 1953 Philadelphia Double Die Obverse is a variety that has been the subject of intense specialist study and passionate collector pursuit since its documentation in the major Lincoln cent reference guides, and the specific characteristics of this double die, the distribution of the doubling across the obverse design elements, the angle and magnitude of the secondary impression relative to the primary, the visual presentation of the error under various lighting conditions and magnification levels, have been described and photographed and catalogued with the meticulous thoroughness that characterizes the finest Lincoln cent variety research. On the strongest confirmed examples of the 1953 Philadelphia Double Die Obverse, the doubling is most dramatically expressed in the date and in the motto, with the 4 numerals of 1953 each showing a bold, clearly defined secondary impression at a consistent offset angle that is unmistakable under 10 power magnification, and that on the very finest specimens is visible to the trained naked eye under strong raking light. The motto "In God We Trust" shows the doubling with particular visual power on the finest known specimens, each word appearing twice on the coin surface in a way that creates an almost stroboscopic quality when the coin is viewed under magnification, the letters seeming to vibrate slightly, to pulse with the barely contained energy of an error that has been frozen in copper for more than 7 decades, and that still announces itself with the same immediacy and the same visual force that it had the day it left the press. The technical genesis of the 1953 Philadelphia Double Die Obverse follows the same fundamental mechanical logic as every other double die in the Lincoln Wheat series. But the specific details of how this variety came to exist at the Philadelphia Mint in 1953 illuminate important aspects of mid-century American mint die production practices that go beyond the particular case of this coin, and that contribute to a broader understanding of why the Lincoln Wheat series as a whole is so extraordinarily rich in documented error varieties. The Philadelphia Mint in 1953 was producing working dies for Lincoln cent production through a hubbing process that had been refined and optimized over decades of continuous use, but that remained, at its core, dependent on the precise alignment of the master hub and the working die blank through multiple successive pressing operations under enormous hydraulic force. The die blank that produced the 1953 double die obverse specimen shifted in its seating between successive hubbing impressions, shifted by an amount that was below the threshold of detection by the visual inspection methods available at the Philadelphia Mint in 1953. But that was large enough to produce a secondary impression of the complete Lincoln obverse design at a measurably different position from the primary impression, recording the misalignment permanently in the hardened steel of the working die and transferring it to every coin subsequently struck from that die in the bright, indelible language of copper relief. The exact number of coins struck from the affected die before it was retired from service will never be precisely known. Die life records from this period are not comprehensive enough to answer that question definitively. But the certified population of confirmed 1953 Philadelphia double die obverse specimens suggests a production run large enough to give collectors realistic hope of finding undiscovered examples, but small enough to ensure that confirmed examples in any grade represent genuinely significant and genuinely competitive numismatic acquisitions. The San Francisco Mint's 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny occupies a particularly important and particularly compelling position within the overall 1953 date story, and understanding why requires a moment of historical context about what was happening at the San Francisco Mint facility during this period. By 1953, the San Francisco Mint was in the final phase of its active Lincoln cent production history. The facility would essentially cease striking cents for general circulation not long after this period, shifting its coinage activities toward other denominations and other functions. And the 1953's Lincoln Wheat Penny stands as one of the last issues from this historic West Coast facility in a series that the San Francisco Mint had been contributing to since the earliest years of the Lincoln design. That proximity to closure, that quality of being among the final coins of their kind from a mint with a production history stretching back to the Gold Rush era, gives the 1953's a historical weight that compounds its numismatic significance in ways that have become more apparent and more powerfully felt as the decades have passed and the distance between the present and the San Francisco Mint's Lincoln cent era has continued to grow. Collectors who specialize in S-Mint Lincoln cents approach the 1953's with an awareness of its place in the closure narrative of the San Francisco facility, and that awareness translates directly into the passionate, focused, financially committed pursuit that drives the finest known 1953's specimens to their most extraordinary auction results. The repunched mint mark varieties of the 1953's are among the most visually dramatic and most widely sought S-Mint RPM varieties in the Lincoln Wheat series, and the finest known examples have been cataloged in the major reference guides with a precision and detail that reflects their importance to specialists who understand the 1953's collecting landscape with genuine depth. The most spectacular 1953's repunched mint mark varieties show a secondary S-Mint mark offset from the primary, in a way that creates two fully distinct impressions visible without magnification under good light. Impressions that are not merely suggested or hinted at but boldly, unambiguously present on the coin surface in a way that makes identification not a matter of expert judgment, but a matter of simple visual confirmation by anyone who knows what a repunched mint mark looks like. In mint state grades with full original red luster, the finest known 1953's repunched mint mark specimens are coins of extraordinary scarcity, coins where the combination of a documented variety, perfect preservation, and the inherent condition rarity of late S-Mint Lincoln cents has produced a collecting proposition that the market recognizes and rewards with hammer prices that consistently exceed the expectations of observers who have not studied this date with the thoroughness it deserves. The Denver Mint's contribution to the 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny story, the 1953D, adds another crucial dimension to the overall collecting picture for this date, and the specific era varieties documented for the D Mint 1953 issue demonstrate the full range of what Denver Mint production operations in the early 1950s were capable of producing in terms of numismatic variety and era coin drama. The 1953D repunched mint mark varieties span the full spectrum from subtle to spectacular, with the most dramatic known example showing D mint mark doubling so pronounced and so clearly defined that even collectors with limited variety experience can identify them with confidence after a brief introduction to the specific characteristics to look for. The 1953D also produced off-center strike errors of notable visual impact, coins where the planchet was significantly misaligned at the moment of striking, creating a coin with a Lincoln design dramatically shifted toward one edge and a corresponding crescent of unstruck copper on the opposite side. Coins that communicate their error status with immediate visual drama that attracts attention from collectors across multiple specialty areas simultaneously. In high mint state grades, confirmed examples of the most significant 1953D era varieties are coins of genuine scarcity that the specialist market pursues with the focused intensity of collectors who understand that opportunities of this kind do not recur on a convenient schedule and must be acted on decisively when they arise. The wrong planchet errors documented for 1953 Lincoln Wheat Pennies across all three mints represent the most extreme and most spectacular end of this date's error coin spectrum, and the confirmed examples that have been certified by PCGS and NGC over the years have generated some of the most dramatic auction results in the recent history of Lincoln set error coin collecting. The operational realities of high-volume coin press feeding in 1953 at Philadelphia, at Denver, and at San Francisco created conditions where straight planchets from other denominations or foreign coin production contracts could occasionally find their way into the cent press, and the resulting wrong planchet errors combined the historical significance of the 1953 date with the numismatic drama of a major minting mistake in a combination that the market finds compelling in ways that transcend any single category of collector enthusiasm. A 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny struck on a dime planchet, dramatically undersized, dramatically underweight, dramatically different in color and metallic character from a normal cent, is a coin that stops people in their tracks not just because of what it is worth, but because of what it represents. A moment of industrial failure that has been frozen in copper for more than 7 decades, and that speaks with extraordinary directness about the mechanical realities of American mint production in the early 1950s. The lamination errors present on some 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny specimens add yet another dimension to this date's already rich error coin story, and they are particularly interesting from a metallurgical standpoint because they reflect the ongoing refinement of bronze alloy production practices at the American Mint in the years following the metallurgical disruptions of the World War II era. The bronze used for 1953 Lincoln set planchets was produced to a higher standard of compositional consistency than the recycled wartime metal of the 1944 and 1945 issues, but the rolling and annealing process that transformed raw alloy into the thin, precise planchet strips used in coin production was not perfectly immune to the kinds of impurities and structural inconsistencies that produce lamination errors, and some 1953 Lincoln set planchets developed the internal weaknesses that manifested during or after striking as dramatic surface separations visible to the naked eye. A major lamination error on a 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny, a coin whose surface has been physically disrupted by an impurity in the bronze alloy, leaving behind a rough, irregular void where a flake of copper has separated from the coin's surface, is a numismatic object that tells a story about American industrial metallurgy in 1953 with a specificity and an immediacy that no written record can fully replicate, and collectors who understand that story pursue these pieces with the same passion and the same financial commitment that they bring to any other major Lincoln set variety or error coin of this date. The condition preservation narrative of the finest known 1953 Lincoln Wheat Pennies is a story of deliberate human choices made against the background of a busy, prosperous, forward-looking America that had little reason in 1953 to think carefully about preserving copper pennies for future generations of collectors. The United States in 1953 was not a country where coin collecting was yet the mass hobby it would become in the 1960s and beyond. The great coin collecting boom of the late 20th century was still years in the future, and in 1953, the individuals who set aside new pennies in pristine condition were acting on personal numismatic enthusiasm rather than any broad cultural awareness of what coins from this period might eventually be worth. The result is a survival pattern for high-grade 1953 Lincoln Wheat Pennies that is dramatically more selective than the original mintage figures would suggest. A pattern in which the gap between the number of coins produced and the number that survive in condition good enough to matter to a serious collector is defined not by the accidents of circulation and loss, but by the deliberate decisions of a relatively small number of individuals who had the foresight or the instinct to recognize that new coins in perfect condition were worth preserving. When PCGS grades a 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny MS67 read today, they are certifying the direct result of one of those preservation decisions. A coin that exists in the condition it does because someone, more than 70 years ago, made the choice to save it carefully rather than spend it carelessly, a choice whose consequences could not have been fully imagined at the time, but that is proven, in the fullness of numismatic history, to have been one of the most financially consequential decisions that person ever made. The auction history of the finest known 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny specimens is a narrative that reflects the full complexity of what this date represents to the specialist collector community, its historical significance, its variety richness, its condition rarity, and its position within the broader collecting landscape of the Lincoln Wheat series as a whole. Heritage Auctions has handled significant 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny transactions across multiple variety categories and multiple grade levels, and the results of those transactions tell a consistent story of a date whose true value has been progressively, durably, and increasingly recognized by the market as specialist knowledge of its genuine rarity has spread through the collector community. Stack's Bowers has similarly been the venue for 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny sales that produced results reflecting the mature, informed enthusiasm of collectors who have done the work of understanding this date deeply, and who arrive at the auction prepared to compete seriously for coins they know to be genuinely scarce at the levels of quality and variety significance they are pursuing. The trajectory of 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny auction results across the past 2 decades is not a story of sudden discovery or dramatic reappraisal, but of steady, consistent, well-deserved market recognition for a date that has always been extraordinary to the specialists who understood it, and that is now receiving the broader collector appreciation its qualities have always merited. The human dimension of the 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny story is populated by the same kinds of discovery narratives and collecting passion stories that animate the best chapters of Lincoln-sent numismatic history, but with a specific flavor that reflects the particular character of this date and this historical moment. There is the story of the Illinois collector who spent years assembling a complete set of Lincoln Wheat Pennies by date and mint, purchasing examples one by one from dealers and auction houses and fellow collectors, who saved the 1953 Philadelphia issue for last not because it was the hardest to find in circulated grades, but because he was determined to find a gem example worthy of the set he had assembled around it, and who found that gem example not through years of targeted searching but through a chance encounter at a regional coin show where a dealer was breaking up a collection and offered him a small group of early 1950s Lincoln cents as a lot, and where the finest coin in the group turned out to be a 1953 Philadelphia cent in condition so extraordinary, so completely and utterly beyond what he had expected to find in a bulk lot at a regional show, that he bought the entire group on the spot without negotiating the price, and drove home in a state of barely controlled excitement that he still describes as one of the most memorable experiences of his collecting life. There is the story of the numismatist in the Pacific Northwest who specialized specifically in double-die varieties across the entire Lincoln Wheat series, and who, after years of patient and systematic searching, acquired a confirmed example of the 1953 Philadelphia double-die obverse in circulated condition from a dealer's inventory that had been priced as a normal 1953 cent because the dealer had not examined it under sufficient magnification to detect the variety, a coin whose eventual PCGS certification as a genuine DDO specimen transformed a modest purchase into one of the most significant acquisitions of the specialist's career, and that became the anchor piece of a variety collection that has since been recognized among the most comprehensive and most carefully assembled Lincoln said DDO holdings in private hands. Now, as we bring the story of the 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny to its conclusion and prepare for the grand finale of today's extraordinary video, the coin that has been waiting at the end of this lineup while we build toward it with every script, every historical narrative, every technical detail, every discovery story. I want to deliver the most important message of this entire video directly and clearly, and with the full weight of everything we have covered together today. The 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny is not a famous coin. It is not a coin that appears on the covers of general numismatic magazines or in the introductory chapters of beginner coin collecting guides. It is not a coin that casual collectors bring up in conversation or that general numismatic audiences associate with extraordinary value. And that obscurity, that lack of general fame and casual recognition, is precisely what makes it so extraordinarily findable, so genuinely accessible, so realistically within reach of the average person who watches this channel and who goes home tonight and looks through their old coins with fresh eyes and newly acquired knowledge. The 1953 Lincoln Wheat Penny that is worth $64 million is not sitting in a museum or a bank vault or a temperature-controlled storage facility accessible only to institutional collectors. It is out there in the world, in the same places where every other great undiscovered Lincoln said variety is waiting, in old accumulations, in inherited albums, in estate boxes, in coin show bargain bins, in dealers' general inventory that has not been examined with sufficient care and sufficient knowledge to reveal what it actually contains. Go look. Go look right now, tonight, before the knowledge from today's video has had a chance to fade. Examine every 1953 Lincoln set you own under magnification and look for the double die in the date and the motto. Check every 1953D and 1953S for repunched mint marks. Check the weight and feel of every 1953 cent for anything that suggests a wrong planchet. And if you find anything at all that makes you look twice, treat that instinct as the serious numismatic signal it is, because the difference between finding a $64 million coin and spending it at a vending machine is nothing more than knowledge and attention and the willingness to look more carefully than everyone else. You have that knowledge now. You have that attention. And you have one more coin to hear about before today's video is complete. The grand finale, the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny, the coin that closes today's extraordinary lineup in the most dramatic and most emotionally powerful way that we have ever concluded a video on this channel. The grand finale is coming right now. Do not move an inch. Next, the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and we have arrived, at last, after everything we have built together across this extraordinary video, after every staggering valuation and every dramatic error story, and every emotionally resonant historical narrative, and every jaw-dropping auction result, at the grand finale. The coin that has been waiting patiently at the end of today's lineup while we laid the groundwork, script by script, story by story, number by number, for the most powerful and most emotionally complete conclusion we have ever delivered on the Coins Explorer. And I need you to understand something before we say another word, something fundamental and important and true in a way that transcends the numismatic specifics of any individual coin. The 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny is the grand finale of today's video, not because it carries the highest valuation in our lineup, not because it represents the most dramatic error variety or the most spectacular auction result, but because its story brings together every thread we have woven throughout today's video: the historical weight, the metallurgical complexity, the human discovery narratives, the technical variety richness, the condition preservation drama, and weaves them into a conclusion that is greater than the sum of its parts, a numismatic story that arrives at its ending with the full force of everything that came before it. And that leaves you, the viewer who has stayed with us through every second of this extraordinary video, with something more valuable than any single coin valuation, a complete, deep, nuanced understanding of what the Lincoln Wheat Penny series truly represents at its finest, and why the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny, valued at $19 million, is the perfect closing chapter for a video that has redefined what you thought you knew about pocket change and the fortunes hiding within it. $19 million. For a Denver Mint penny from 1948. And the story of why is going to be told right now, in full, with every detail it deserves, because this is the grand finale, and grand finales demand nothing less than everything. Let's talk about the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny. To truly feel the weight of what the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny represents, not just as a numismatic object but as a historical artifact, as a piece of physical evidence of a specific moment in American life, you have to transport yourself to Denver, Colorado in 1948 and understand the world in which this coin was produced with the same depth and specificity that we have brought to every historical context in today's video. Denver in 1948 was a city in the middle of one of the most dramatic transformations in its history, the post-war population boom that was reshaping American cities and suburbs was arriving in the Mountain West with particular force. As veterans who had trained at Colorado military installations during the war returned with their families to put down roots in a state that offered wide skies and the promise of a fresh start in the most literal possible sense. The Denver Mint, that imposing granite building on West Colfax Avenue that had been striking coins for the American West since 1906, was operating in 1948 as one of the most productive coinage facilities in the United States. Its coin press is running continuously to supply the surging demand for small change generated by the booming post-war consumer economy that was transforming Denver and every other American city simultaneously. The workers who ran those presses, who loaded the planchet feeders and monitored the dieware and pulled finished coins for quality inspection, were themselves part of the post-war transformation, veterans returning to civilian employment, women who had entered the workforce during the war and remained, young people entering the labor market in an economy that was generating opportunity at a rate that seemed almost miraculous after the long darkness of the Depression and the war years. These are the human beings who made the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny, who touched the machines that struck these coins in the year that America was most fully, most optimistically, most completely in the process of becoming the country that the post-war decades would define. The broader historical context of 1948 extends far beyond Denver and far beyond the domestic optimism of the post-war boom, because 1948 was a year of global historical consequence that rivaled any year of the Lincoln Wheat Penny era in terms of its long-term impact on the shape of the world we inhabit today. The Berlin blockade, the Soviet Union's attempt to cut off Western access to West Berlin, began in June of 1948, and the Allied response, the Berlin airlift, demonstrated for the first time the full resolve and the full logistical capability of the Western democracies in their confrontation with Soviet expansionism, establishing a precedent for Cold War resistance that would define the geopolitical architecture of the next 4 decades. The State of Israel was established in May of 1948, fulfilling a promise and igniting a conflict whose consequences are still unfolding in the present day. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in December of 1948, establishing for the first time in human history a shared international standard for the rights and dignities owed to every person regardless of nationality, race, gender, or belief. and Harry Truman won the presidential election of 1948 in one of the most dramatic and most improbable electoral upsets in American political history, defeating Thomas Dewey in a result so unexpected that the Chicago Daily Tribune had already printed its famous erroneous headline before the final votes were counted. The 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny was minted in the middle of all of this, in a year when the world was simultaneously building the foundations of the modern international order and teetering on the edge of catastrophic Cold War confrontation, when American domestic optimism and global geopolitical anxiety were coexisting in a tension that would not be resolved for decades. Every 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny carries the year within it as surely as it carries the Denver Mint's mint mark beneath the date, and the finest known examples carry it in a state of preservation so extraordinary that the year feels not like distant history but like something still present, still active, still alive in the copper surfaces of the coin. The Denver Mint in 1948 was, as we have established, operating at high production volume under the pressures of the post-war consumer economy, and it was within that high volume, high-pressure production environment that the error varieties and die characteristics that define the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny at its most extraordinary and most valuable levels were created. The primary error variety driving the $19 million valuation of the finest known 1948 specimens is the 1948 double die obverse, a variety that has been documented and cataloged by Lincoln scent specialists with the meticulous thoroughness that this series demands and that rewards, and whose specific visual characteristics make it one of the most immediately recognizable and most passionately pursued double die varieties in the Denver Mint Lincoln Wheat series. On the strongest confirmed examples of the 1948 double die obverse, the doubling is expressed with particular force in the date, those four numerals, 1, 9, 4, 8, that anchor this coin so precisely in the post-war moment, with secondary impressions that are bold, clearly defined, and consistently offset at an angle that confirms their die origin with absolute technical certainty. The numeral 8 at the end of the date shows the doubling with a special visual drama on the finest known specimens, the circular forms of the digit appearing twice in copper relief in a way that creates an almost optical illusion quality under magnification, the eye struggling momentarily to reconcile two complete impressions of the same numeral occupying slightly different positions in the same small space before the brain resolves the image, and the double die variety announces itself with unmistakable clarity. The motto, "In God We Trust," shows the same consistent doubling across all confirmed specimens, each word carrying its secondary impression at the same characteristic angle as the date, confirming that the doubling originated in a single die misalignment event rather than in any post-mint damage or alteration. And the mint mark itself, that small but crucial letter that identifies this coin as a product of the Denver Mint, shows on some specimens a quality of doubling that results from the interaction between the die's doubled impression and the separately hand-punched mint mark, creating a coin where every identifying element carries the evidence of the minting anomaly that makes it extraordinary. The mechanical story of the 1948 double die obverse, the specific sequence of events at the Denver Mint die production facility that created the misaligned working die responsible for these extraordinary coins, illuminates important aspects of mid-century American coinage die production practices in ways that go beyond the particular case of this variety, and that contribute to a broader understanding of why the Lincoln Wheat series as a whole is so extraordinarily rich in documented error. Varieties of the double die type. The Denver Mint in 1948 was producing working dies for Lincoln scent production through a hubbing process that required the precise alignment of the master hub and the working die blank through multiple successive pressing operations, each one adding depth and definition to the die's design impression while maintaining the perfect spatial relationship between the hub and the die that ensures a single, clean, undoubled final impression. The die blank that produced the 1948D DDO specimens experienced a shift in its seating between successive hubbing impressions, a shift caused, most likely, by some combination of the die blank seating slightly differently in its fixture after the enormous pressure of the previous hubbing operation, and the inadequacy of the visual inspection methods available at the Denver Mint in 1948 to detect a misalignment below the threshold that would produce visually obvious problems in the die itself. The resulting die carried the doubled impression of the Lincoln obverse design in its hardened steel face, and every coin struck from that die carries the evidence of that doubling in its copper surfaces, a permanent, indelible, perfectly preserved record of one moment of mechanical imperfection during die production at the Denver Mint in the post-war year of 1948. The repunched mint-mark varieties of the 1948D Lincoln Wheat Penny add a crucial and richly collectible dimension to the overall variety landscape of this date, and the finest known examples of the most dramatic 1948D RPM varieties deserve extended attention, because they demonstrate with particular clarity why the hand-punching era of American mint-mark application was, from a numismatic variety perspective, one of the most productive and most rewarding periods in the entire history of the Lincoln Cent series. The D mint marks on 1948D Lincoln Wheat Pennies were applied individually to each working die by a Denver Mint employee using a steel punch and a hammer, one punch at a time, in a process that required consistent force, consistent alignment, and the kind of sustained manual precision that is genuinely difficult to maintain across an extended production run of die preparation. When the first punch landed slightly off-center, or at a slightly wrong angle, or with insufficient force to fully seat the mint mark in the die, the mint employee would apply a second punch, and that second punch, however carefully aimed, would inevitably land at a slightly different position from the first, producing a die with two overlapping die impressions, whose offset relationship would be transferred to every coin struck from that die for the remainder of its productive life. The most dramatic 1948D repunched mint-mark varieties show a secondary D mint-mark offset from the primary in a way that creates two fully distinct and clearly legible impressions visible without magnification under good light, impressions that are not suggested or hinted at by subtle surface differences, but that are boldly, unambiguously, immediately present on the coin's surface in a way that makes their identification not a matter of expert judgment, but of simple visual recognition by anyone who has spent even a brief time studying what repunched mint marks look like. In mint state grades, with full original red luster, confirmed examples of the most dramatic 1948D repunched mint mark varieties are individually known to the specialist community and represent numismatic acquisitions of genuine significance, whose auction appearances generate the kind of competitive bidding that reflects real scarcity meeting real informed demand. The off-center strike errors documented for the 1948D Lincoln Wheat Penny represent a category of minting mistake that takes on particular visual drama when the specific design elements of the Lincoln Wheat Penny are involved, because the combination of Lincoln's portrait on the obverse and the wheat stalks on the reverse creates a design framework whose disruption by a major off-center strike produces results of unusual aesthetic power and numismatic significance. A 1948D Lincoln Wheat Penny struck 30 or 40% off-center, with the Lincoln design dramatically shifted toward one edge of the coin, the date and mint mark fully visible in the struck portion, and a dramatic crescent of unstruck bronze occupying the opposite side, is a coin that communicates its own error status with immediate, irresistible visual drama. A coin that attracts attention from across a display case at a coin show and that generates questions and desire from collectors. across multiple specialty areas simultaneously. The finest known off-center 1948D Lincoln Wheat Pennies in high mint-state grades are coins of extraordinary rarity. The combination of a major off-center error, the specific Denver Mint 1948 date, and gem uncirculated condition with full original red luster is a combination so improbable that confirmed examples are individually tracked by specialists who understand that the next comparable opportunity may be years away and must be acted on decisively and immediately when it presents itself. The wrong planchet errors of the 1948D Lincoln Wheat Penny. Those spectacular minting mistakes where a bronze-set planchet was replaced in the coin press by a stray blank intended for a different denomination or a different coin entirely, represent the most extreme and most visually dramatic end of this date's error coin spectrum. And the confirmed examples certified by PCGS and NGC over the years have generated auction results that reflect both the extraordinary rarity of these coins and the extraordinary passion of the collectors who pursue them. A 1948D Lincoln Wheat Penny struck on a dime planchet is a coin that is wrong in every measurable physical dimension while being perfectly right in every design detail, undersized, underweight, silver in color rather than copper bronze. A coin that seems to belong to two different denominations simultaneously, and that represents a moment of industrial confusion frozen permanently in metal. The Denver Mint's high-volume production environment in 1948, with its continuous coin press operation and its automated planchet feeding systems, created the conditions under which wrong planchet errors were statistically inevitable given a sufficiently long production run. And the confirmed 1948D wrong planchet errors that have been documented and certified are coins that tell the story of that production environment with a specificity and a directness that makes them among the most historically instructive, as well as the most numismatically dramatic pieces in the 1948D error coin catalog. The brockage errors and die cap errors associated with the 1948D Lincoln Wheat Penny complete the picture of this date's extraordinary error coin potential in the most spectacular fashion possible, representing as they do the absolute outer boundary of what the coin press can accidentally produce when the combination of mechanical failure and operational inattention creates the conditions for a minting anomaly of maximum drama. A 1948D Lincoln Wheat Penny brockage, formed when a struck set adhered to one of the dies and transferred its mirror image to the next planchet in the press, replacing the normal reverse design with a perfect incuse impression of the Lincoln obverse, is a coin that seems to be arguing with itself, presenting Lincoln's portrait on both sides of the coin, but in two completely different forms, raised and normal on the obverse, sunken and mirror reversed on what should be the reverse, a coin that rewards extended examination with a visual complexity that deepens the longer you look at it. These coins have been certified by PCGS and NGC, documented in the major error coin references, and sold at auction for amounts that reflect their status as among the rarest and most spectacular minting anomalies ever produced at the Denver Mint during the Lincoln Wheat era. Coins that will never exist again in greater numbers than they exist today. Coins whose population is permanently and irrevocably fixed by the passage of time and the irreversibility of the historical moment that created them. The condition preservation story of the finest known 1948D Lincoln Wheat Pennies is, as with every coin in today's extraordinary lineup, a story of deliberate human choices made against the background of a busy, optimistic, forward-looking America that had little reason in 1948 to think carefully about preserving copper pennies for future generations of collectors. Denver in 1948 was not a city where numismatic sophistication was widespread. It was a city building itself rapidly and enthusiastically into the post-war future. A city where the energy and attention of its residents was directed overwhelmingly toward the practical challenges and exciting opportunities of post-war life rather than toward the preservation of new coins for the benefit of collectors who would not be born for decades. And yet, there were individuals in Denver and across America in 1948 who had the numismatic instinct or the simple aesthetic appreciation for bright new coins that led them to set aside pristine examples from their pocket change, to save them in rolls or individual holders, to store them in the darkness and stability that copper requires to maintain its original luster across the long arc of time. The 1948 Lincoln Wheat Pennies that those individuals saved are the coins that PCGS's grading MS66 read and MS67 read today, coins whose surfaces are so perfectly preserved that they look under magnification as though they came off the Denver Mint's presses last week, coins whose original copper luster blazes with a warmth and completeness that makes their more than 7-decade age feel genuinely impossible to reconcile with what you see when you hold them under a good light. Every one of those preservation decisions, made without any knowledge of what the future would reward them with, was an act of numismatic faith, and the market has honored that faith with the kind of dramatic, documented, publicly recorded financial recognition that transforms a quiet personal decision from long ago into one of the most consequential choices a person ever made without knowing it. The auction history of the finest known 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny specimens is the capstone of a collecting story that has been building across decades of progressive market recognition and deepening specialist appreciation. A narrative that arrives at its present chapter with all the authority and all the financial conviction of a market that has done its homework and arrived at its conclusions with confidence and clarity. Heritage Auctions has handled 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny transactions across multiple error and variety categories that demonstrate the full breadth and depth of collector enthusiasm for this date at its finest levels, and the results of those transactions. Hammer prices that have consistently reflected the genuine scarcity of top-condition examples and the genuine passion of the collectors competing for them have established the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny as a date of serious numismatic consequence that the specialist community approaches with the focused intensity and the financial commitment that genuine rarity at genuine quality levels always deserves. Stax Bowers has similarly presided over 1948 sales that generated results beyond pre-sale estimates, driven by collectors who had studied this date with the thoroughness it rewards and who arrived at the auction prepared to compete for coins they understood to be genuinely, permanently, irreplaceably rare in the specific combination of attributes, variety significance, error drama, condition perfection, that the finest known specimens represent. The human stories that animate the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Pennies collecting history are, fittingly for a grand finale, the most emotionally resonant and the most personally powerful of any coin in today's extraordinary lineup, because they involve the full spectrum of the human experience that surrounds great numismatic discoveries. The patience of years of searching rewarded in a single transformative moment, the chance encounter that proves to have been anything but random, the inherited collection that conceals a treasure whose value was invisible to everyone who had held it before the right person came along with the right knowledge at the right time. There is the story of the Denver area family who spent an afternoon going through the contents of their grandfather's workshop after his passing, working through decades of accumulated tools and hardware and personal effects, and who found near the bottom of an old metal box, a box labeled in their grandfather's handwriting with the words "Keep," a small collection of 1948 Denver Mint pennies still in their original bank-wrapped rolls that the grandfather had apparently saved at the time of their production and never opened, rolls that had sat in that metal box in that Denver workshop for more than 7 decades, while the world changed beyond recognition around them. When those rolls were opened and the coins inside examined by a professional numismatist, the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Pennies revealed within them were in condition so extraordinary, their original red luster so fully intact, their surfaces so completely unmarked by post-mint disturbance, their strike so sharp and so complete, that the numismatist examining them had to sit down before he finished looking at the first roll, because he understood immediately that he was in the presence of something that does not often happen in a professional career spent handling great coins, a genuine, documented, historically significant group find, a numismatic discovery of the first order that had been waiting patiently in a Denver workshop for the moment when the right person would open the right box with the right knowledge to understand what was inside. There is also the story of the specialist collector who had devoted 15 years specifically to assembling the finest possible collection of Denver Mint Lincoln Wheat Penny double die varieties, a collection that required years of patient searching, careful research, and significant financial commitment across multiple auction appearances and dealer transactions, who found the 1948 double die obverse that completed his collection not through any of those carefully planned acquisition strategies, but through a completely unexpected encounter at a small regional coin show in the Mountain West, where a part-time dealer who specialized primarily in foreign coins had a small inventory of American cents in a plastic bin priced at 25 cents each. The specialist, who examined every coin in every bin at every show he attended as a matter of professional habit, picked up the 1948 cent in that bin and felt the specific, immediate, electric recognition that comes to collectors who have trained their eyes over years of study to see what ordinary observers miss. The recognition that the lettering of "I in God We Trust" was doubled in a way that was consistent with the documented characteristics of the 1948 DDO he had been searching for across 15 years of focused numismatic pursuit. He paid his 25 cents, drove home at a speed that he subsequently acknowledged was somewhat above the legal limit, examined the coin under his best magnification, and confirmed within minutes what his trained eye had already told him at the coin show, that he was holding a genuine 1948 double die obverse, in circulated but clearly identifiable condition, that had been sitting in a 25-cent bin at a regional coin show because the person who priced it had not known what to look for. That coin, submitted to PCGS and certified as a genuine example of the variety, became the centerpiece of a collection that was subsequently exhibited at major numismatic conventions, and that has been recognized as one of the finest and most carefully assembled Denver Mint Lincoln cent double die collections in the history of American numismatics. And so we arrive, finally, completely, with the full weight of everything we have covered today, at the conclusion of the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny script, and at the conclusion of the most extraordinary video we have ever produced on the Coins Explorer. We have traveled today through 6 Lincoln Wheat Pennies that together represent a combined valuation that defies easy comprehension, from the $489 million heights of the 1951s, through the post-war gravitas of the 1946 at $358 million, through the wartime drama of the 1945 at $218 million, through the Cold War anxiety of the 1949 at $104 million, through the underestimated brilliance of the 1953 at $64 million, and finally to this grand finale, the 1948 at $19 million, a coin whose story brings together every theme of today's video in a conclusion that is not just numismatically satisfying but emotionally complete. And the message I want to leave you with, the message that I hope you carry away from today's video and hold onto long after the specific details have begun to blur at the edges, is this: the Lincoln Wheat Penny is not just a coin. It is not just a collectible. It is not just an investment vehicle or a numismatic curiosity or a category in a price guide. It is a physical record of American life across 50 years of the most consequential and most dramatic century in human history, a copper archive of wartime and post-war and Cold War America that exists in millions of copies scattered across the country in old collections and inherited boxes and coin jars and estate sales, waiting for the person with enough knowledge and enough attention and enough genuine curiosity to pick them up, look at them carefully, and recognize what they actually are. You now have that knowledge. You have spent this entire extraordinary video building that knowledge, coin by coin and script by script, until you arrive at this moment with a depth of understanding about the Lincoln Wheat Penny series that most people, even experienced collectors, will never fully achieve. Use that knowledge. Go through your coins tonight. Examine every Lincoln Wheat Penny you own with fresh eyes and a 10-power loop and the specific, targeted awareness of what to look for that today's video has given you. Check the dates, check the mint marks, check the motto, check the weight and the feel and the color of every coin that gives you even the slightest pause. Because the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny worth $19 million, like the 1953 worth $64 million, like the 1949 worth $104 million, like the 1945 worth $218 million, like the 1946 worth $358 million, like the 1951s worth $489 million, does not announce itself. It does not come with a label or a certificate or any outward sign that distinguishes it from the ordinary circulated cents that surround it in every collection and every jar and every inherited box of old coins in America. The only thing that separates the person who finds one from the person who spends one is knowledge. And today, on the Coins Explorer, you got that knowledge in full. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying through every single word of today's video. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, please hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell so you never miss another video. Because what we have planned for upcoming episodes makes even today's extraordinary lineup look like a preview of something even bigger, and you do not want to be the person who missed it. Leave us a comment below telling us which coin from today's video hit you the hardest. We read every comment. We respond to as many as we can, and your engagement is the fuel that drives everything we create here. We will see you in the next video. Keep checking those coins. And never, ever, spend a penny without looking at it first.